Okay, I'm going to start now. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me in this presentation. I know it's winding down time and you probably have flights to catch, etc. My name is Errol Adams, and I'm currently an electronic services reference librarian at Elizabeth Haub School of Law in White Plains, New York. I was actually formerly Pace Law School. The name was recently changed due to an endowment. That's my baby. I recently returned from Nassau, New Providence in the Bahamas, where I managed the law library at the College of the Bahamas. I have an avid interest in social media, both personally and professionally. And I also have an interest in its interaction with libraries and teaching. At Pace Law Library, I'm tasked with managing the social media for the library. And while at the College of the Bahamas, I established and maintain their social media pages relative to the law collection. What's going to be the roadmap for this session? We're going to go through an introduction, which would include definition, terminologies, the law school social media policy, law school education, the future of the practice of law, learning and attention, multitasking, visualization aids, and memory. I'm going to go over the Facebook group, going to the Facebook group page, and thank you all for joining, those who did. And as you can see, it's very useful in terms of, it could be a useful tool, kind of like an LMS, to assist you in delivering your lectures. I'm also going to go over social media in classrooms generally. There hasn't been a lot of research that I've found relative to social media in classrooms in terms of a law school setting. There are some studies in higher education, though, and I'm actually going to be using that as a parallel in this presentation. I'm going to focus on social media in law school classrooms specifically. Kind of going over some of the barriers, the opportunities, the fact that collaboration and visualization in terms of teaching is important. Social media appropriate classes, which would be somewhat innovative. I'm going to suggest that in the first year, you can probably use social media for legal research and writing, in terms of a Facebook group page for torts, contracts, the second year accounting for lawyers, interviewing, counseling and negotiation, children in the law, mental disability, and I can go on. In the third year, mostly the clinic's probably the best place to use them. In terms of electives, some schools have social media in the law. Of course, that's definitely a place to use it, in addition to professional responsibility, which is a major place, and where probably all law schools should be teaching professional responsibility using social media, because it's the thing now. If you look at all the ethics opinions that are coming out, a lot of focus is placed on the use of social media by lawyers. I'm also going to go over a little bit of social media tools and then have a conclusion. I did not mention social media training. I'm going to touch on that a little bit in terms of practical and theoretical ways that you can kind of try to get a handle on using social media to teach. By way of introduction, I'm sure all of you are familiar with what is social media, so I'm not going to spend much time on that. And who are digital natives? I think that's also something that you're probably really familiar with. I'm just going to reiterate. Most law students these days are from the millennial generation. They feel special and entitled, and they are experts at multitasking. In terms of terminology, in my reading, I came across terms such as SNS, an acronym for Social Networking Sites, ICTS, Information and Communications Technology, and of course, most of you are familiar with LMS, the learning management systems such as Moodle, Blackboard, Twin, and now I am suggesting that social media tools can also be utilized as a form of an LMS system. You're probably all aware of the ABA competency requirement in terms of lawyers being aware of the benefits and risks associated with technology. And I think that using social media to teach is probably a good way to introduce them to that from the very beginning. In terms of law school education, you're all familiar with the Socratic method. I'm of the belief that I attended Deborah Cohen's session yesterday, and she said that we should be somewhere in between. I'm leaning more towards the side of the students being more technology savvy than they are, and utilizing their millennial aspects to make them more effective as attorneys, because legal practice is changing. There's now virtual law practice and artificial intelligence. And I think if we were to kind of try to predict the future, the practice of law, I think, is going to be of a format where I think one author that I read mentioned that there isn't going to be a law office anymore. Everything is going to be virtual. So I think we have to kind of think way ahead in terms of the way we're teaching the students that we have in our various law schools today. I just want to play this video really quickly. I thought it was really interesting and kind of going to a lot of aspects of learning and the millennial generation. Hopefully it plays without any snafus. And it did not.
No, on my screen in the video.
That's what I'm doing. Sorry about that. Not sure why that's happening. That did not happen when I practiced. You're not seeing my cursor, but I'm actually pressing that. Okay, basically the video kind of went over the fact that millennials, their brains are really medically, I mean, I've read a lot of the literature out there, and their way of thinking is totally different, like just the way their brains are made up. It's different to, I guess, what we think it should be, and I guess the way we were taught when we were in law school, it's different. They're not made the same way in terms of the way they think, and I think we have to pay attention to that. I don't think this video is going to work either, but basically what it was a video that kind of went through creating a Facebook group page, which is something that's fairly new and innovative on Facebook. You can set it up in such a way, and I'm going to go to the Facebook page that I created, group page that I created. There it is. All right, I'm not getting to that screen on my, I'm doing an extended screen, and it's, for some reason, it's acting weird. No, I have an internet connection still. That's kind of what's happening. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm not seeing my cursor. All right. I think most of you have been on the group page, and you can see I kind of added a poll, which is really interesting. That I think only one person said that they use any form of social media as a tool to teach their class. But the same way that I created that poll, you can actually do the same thing in terms of trying to assess the students and give them quizzes in the things that you may have taught in class. In addition to that, if I could have scrolled on that page, I would have shown you. For some reason, I am unable to do that, and I apologize again. Let's see if it works. Screen, but I'm not able to. Okay. Oh, okay, it's moving now. Okay. Okay, one of the things I wanted to show you is kind of, this one was really. Duh.
So you don't hurt your neck.
That was really interesting in that you can actually post and upload various files for the students to see whatever it is that you're doing. I did not try, some of my reading actually said that it's not really good with PowerPoint. So what I would advise in terms of PowerPoint is convert it to an image and just post it as photos instead. which would work just as well. Go ahead.
I guess the issue is like, I don't know if I necessarily want to be like Facebook friends with students.
That's correct. You don't have to friend them. Like everyone that came onto the group page, I didn't friend them. I mean, they reached out and some people tried to friend me, but I didn't accept it. You have that choice. So it's just basically for the group page that you're, for the class, that you're utilizing the page. The other thing that I thought was really useful is kind of setting up events when you have whatever it is you have going on in the class in terms of you have a speaker, et cetera, you can set it up. You can post photos in terms of, like I said, the PowerPoint slides that you may want to, and this is a really good one that I am going to get into a little bit further, in terms of using social media in classrooms in general. Do you have any questions regarding using the Facebook group page to teach a class? Go ahead.
Yeah, how does, usually. Like Facebook, a while back, photos, and so a bunch of photographers, fine, I'm not posting my photos on Facebook. Apps, images.
Well, I'm sorry, I did not say in the beginning. I'm actually new to PACE Law,
Oh, okay.
or Elizabeth Haub School of Law, and this is something that's really innovative that I've just mentioned recently. And I can tell that it's going to take some time in terms of trying to convince faculty to utilize it, starting with the legal research, the librarians. And the issue I'm finding is the fact that administration may not necessarily be very willing because it's something new. And like I said, I'm going to go more into ways in which you can kind of educate yourself to convince them that it's something that's probably going to be better to use than the LMS system that they're using. Because most students, when you go into classrooms now, they're not on Blackboard, they're on Facebook or Twitter. So I think the better way to reach the students is using the methodology they're using in their everyday life, and that's what they're using. Go ahead.
Now it's like got like 5 rooms back. And he uses it for lessons. As
The other thing, I'm sorry, the other thing is a lot of law schools I've found don't have a social media policy, and that's really important because once they have the social media policy kind of set, that's going to kind of cover that area also, which, like I said, this is something that's really innovative. Even many law firms and other businesses don't have a social media policy, which is something that's kind of cropping up now that they have to kind of get. And if they do have a social media policy, it's for the school in general in terms of their social media site not being utilized for teaching or as an LMS tool. Go ahead. The question was, what do you do with students who don't have Facebook and they have privacy concerns? That's actually a major issue, and I think one of the best ways that, in terms of what I've read thus far, in handling that is to try to convince students that it's something that they're going to face as they go out into the real world, and learning how to do it use it in law school is probably the best way to utilize it. One of the things that came up in my reading is I read an ethics report where I think there was something mentioned about a lawyer not being diligent in terms of checking social media to assist him in his preparation for litigation. Because as you're aware, it's a way to utilize it to counter in terms of having a witness on the stand. You can utilize what they've posted on Facebook to.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I do know that there's a lot of concerns about tracking that they can do. Plug into Facebook ads will show up. At least, you know. But I know there's at least in the not because they're against social media.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying partially, but I also think that it's something that they can't block themselves away from entirely. Because like I said, it's something that a lawyer's responsible for being diligent when they're in practice to actually look at social media if they have clients to try to utilize the information they would find in their diligent research to kind of counteract questions that they may have. I think that's the best way to kind of, it's something that's going to come up in their practice. And in terms of ethics, they probably have to be aware of what are some of the things, if someone were to send you a Facebook message and they're saying certain things, how do you respond to that, et cetera, which would come up in a professional responsibility class utilizing social media.
I agree with that somewhat, but Facebook has, so many people have added the Facebook code to their website. Level than any other
But you
service
go
out
to
there.
dictionary.com.
There's more people that have added like Facebook like buttons to pages on the internet than any other place. We're using Facebook for one. Well, certainly dictionary.com or DoubleClick or even what Google does. It does not compare to the level of information that Facebook's. I don't disagree with that, but I do think there's a lot of students, not a lot, some students that do not want to use Facebook at all. That's something, if you had it in your class, you'd be. That's Facebook in particular. I'll leave it there. I don't want to make this a privacy discussion, so yeah.
That's okay, and your concerns are valid. Your concerns are definitely valid. And the other thing I must say is that you can set up the Facebook group as a secret group also, where it's only people that you want to be in that page can be in it and can see what's in that page. The only thing, what I've discovered is that whatever I post as the administrator goes to my feed on my page, which I thought was kind of weird, and I haven't figured out how I can stop that. And I think there is a way to stop it. I am somewhat of an expert, but not totally, because they keep changing things around, and you kind of have to go in and update yourself regularly, because there's probably something new out. They probably can do the PowerPoint presentations now. I'm not aware of it though. What I found in my research, which is really interesting, like I said before, the learning theory is really important in terms of the way that you're delivering your lectures to law students today. And I found a really good kind of pictorial view, if you can see this here, in terms of how you can decide to utilize technology, primarily social media, to teach your classes. And this was a SOMI kit, and SOMI is kind of the acronym for social media, the capital S, lowercase o, and then capital M, lowercase e. This I found as a higher education research, in a higher education research paper, and it can be utilized to assist law faculty in determining the appropriateness of a social media tool in class. If you notice, it's divided into 4 different sections. The instructional method is further divided into a teacher-centered versus a student-centered approach. And then there are knowledge levels, which actually focuses on Bloom's taxonomy of learning, which was recently changed. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy of learning, but it is something that I also found in my research when I was preparing for this presentation, that a lot of law faculty members are not necessarily trained in learning philosophy and how to teach. I think most law schools tend to be more focused on their scholastic ability and their ability to write articles that would kind of put the school on the web, so to speak, and bring in more donors. I think it's probably really important for law faculty just to ensure the success of their students, to ensure that they're familiar with learning theory as it is dealing with the millennial generation. The diagram that I'm speaking of goes into content type and then evaluation. And I have another slide that kind of explains it a little bit more. In terms of Bloom's taxonomy of learning, it is a framework that divides learning into categories relative to cognition. Introducing law students to this in class in terms of being transparent to the students may be helpful because they need to know what it is or the level at which they need to be. And of course, as law students, they need to be at the peak, which is creating and evaluating. Kind of the tools that you can utilize in using this Bloom's taxonomy in terms of social media and technology, remembering you can use YouTube, Google, and Yahoo. In terms of understanding, you can use Skype and Twitter. Applying, you can use Picasa, Pipes. Analyzing and evaluating, which are the ones that are most specific to law students, are Google Docs, Google Analytics, Remix. And then evaluating would be PollDaddy, Wikipedia, and Google Alerts. Notice that Facebook wasn't on it, but I think Facebook encompasses all of these tools because you can put a YouTube video in a Facebook group page. You can link a Twitter feed to Facebook and have it come into a Facebook feed. You can use a tool like PollDaddy in conjunction with Twitter. You can also use Google Docs with the Facebook group page. Going back to the SOMI kit that I mentioned earlier, if you can see this clearly, you'll see that this kind of separates the various instructional methods that can, sorry about that, that can be implemented with a social media a class that's being taught using social media, in terms of the content type that can be used, what kind of learning activities can be implemented according to the knowledge levels, and which assessment types can be implemented with each SOMI class. And it further goes into kind of doing the interrelationship between the instructional methods implemented, the content types to be used, the learning activities, and assessment types, along with the type of social media tools that can be utilized. So in terms of you making the determination as to whether a torts class, you should use Facebook to teach the torts class, these are some of the things that you may want to consider. And this was taken from CALIcon16 et al. Article in Exploration of Teaching Preference of an Instructor's Use of Social Media. And it was a really, really good article. I'm going to the end of this presentation. I have a link I'm going to add this to the CALIcon site for resources, and you'll be able to have access to all the materials that I utilized in coming up with this, in preparing this presentation. In terms of social media in the law school classroom specifically, I think there are practical considerations. As you mentioned earlier, in terms of ethics, bar admission, and employment, students need to be aware of the ethical implications of using social media, which would include privacy, etc. They need to be aware that their use of social media may also affect their ability to be admitted to the bar in certain states, and also their employment prospects. In terms of it being utilized as an interactive teaching platform, I think as faculty members, we will have to be very clear in the beginning of the class to make certain issues that would present themselves amongst the class members in terms of certain rules set up for the way you communicate on Facebook with your colleagues. And I think this is a good learning tool for them going forward in the future as they practice law, to learn how to communicate in a professional manner on social media. So I think you being the administrator of the Facebook group page, you'll be able to correct them if they make mistakes that, are really not the thing to do when they're in the professional world. You can utilize the interactive teaching platform of a social media tool such as Facebook group page for videos, photos, like I said, presentations. You can have students do projects, taking photos of whatever it is that you may be working on in that specific class that's important. For example, if you're doing contracts and you want students to kind of do some research and get some examples of what an offer is, and kind of post a picture on Facebook of what it is. And then those are good ways to kind of start discussion in class and increase collaboration among students and allow them to kind of retain the information that they need to retain to learn the subject matter of the various subjects they may be learning. In terms of documents, you can do the same thing. You can upload documents on the Facebook group page like I showed earlier. You can also utilize Facebook and other social media tools to do research, literally using hashtags. So there are a lot of things that you can find quicker on social media, I think, and I'm a librarian, than you would find in, at times, certain databases. In certain topics, that is not necessarily a case, but in for specific areas that are not necessarily germane to the legal databases. The use of visual aids increases learning, and that's why I'm saying that utilizing social media would be a good tool. In terms of, and the ways this could be done is verbally, learning through verbal text. In terms of visual, learning through photos, oral, learning by talking out ideas, which they can do in a discussion forum on Facebook. The oral method, listening to lectures, recordings, and discussions. You can put a YouTube video or recording of a podcast discussion on Facebook. Then there's a tactile method of touching and manipulating materials, which they can do by printing out the information that you may send to them, and kind of utilize that in their presentations, etc. In terms of there's another methodology, which is the kinesthetic method of moving and doing, and they can actually record themselves in a trial practice class, giving an opening or a closing statement, and post it on YouTube, let's say, and kind of have a discussion in the class about, okay, well, how was your opening statement versus mine, or the closing statement, what were the strengths and weaknesses, etc. And they would tend to kind of remember those things better than they would if it's just something that they're reading or being lectured about. As I said earlier, certain classes lend themselves readily to social media interactivity. Professional responsibilities, one, trial practice is one, like I said earlier, contracts, real property. In terms of describing and using various estate charts, I remember when I was in real property, I still don't know what the rule against perpetuities is, but maybe if it was kind of pictorially presented, I would get it better than just having to read it and try to understand it. I did the presentation yesterday about infographics. You can create an infographic and post that infographic on Facebook. I think students are more likely to remember fee simple absolute in its variations, having the images of it versus reading it and kind of trying to figure out who was what, when, and where. You can also utilize social media for international law in terms of viewing the Hague trials and in clinics, using blog pages, et cetera, to kind of go over the students' experiences in their respective clinic classes and having discussions about their experiences. In terms of social media training for classrooms, there are various associations, including AALL, as you're aware, and one that I found that was really interesting that I was not aware of prior to my doing research for this presentation is there is an annual teaching professor conference, and it literally has, if you go on the link when you get the resources, you'll see that there are actually presentations that focus primarily on using social media in a classroom setting. And this is mostly for regular undergraduate colleges, but I think the same principles can kind of be applied, maybe with a little bit of variation for it to be done in a law school setting. The Society of American Law Teachers annual conference, I did a little bit of research on their prior presentations. I didn't see anything per se that was specific to it. But what I did find is, in terms of theoretical examples, there are a lot of law review articles that are published dealing with these issues that actually go over one of the major themes that I saw throughout my readings was the learning theory and the fact that faculty needs to be familiar with where learning theory is as it stands today and where you need to be as someone trying to deliver information to the students for them to retain it. Of course, there's YouTube and Cali that we're all at right now. And there are two sites that I put the link is a hyperlink here. Tech and Tools is a good one, and Celebrate Languages. There are a lot of examples on those sites in terms of tools that you can utilize in the classroom to deliver information to students that they may retain a little bit better than they do currently just reading materials. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, in terms of social media tools, I mentioned Facebook group page, and you've seen it. You can do the same thing with Twitter, create a Twitter handle. I'm sure all of you are familiar with what a Twitter handle is. A Twitter handle for the class at, let's say, Pace Legal Research, something to make it applicable to that class. And I'm guessing that same Twitter handle you can use and reuse if it's the same class you're teaching, and kind of encourage the students to create lists, use lists on the page for various topic areas. Encourage the students to be familiar with hashtags. So for each class, you can, let's say you're doing a contracts class and you're focusing on offer, you can put the hashtag pound offer, definition, post pictures, etc., of examples of what an offer is. Even the video to do verbal offers. I mean, there are so many things you can do with social media, I think, and I'm sure you'll agree as you do more reading in the area. Pinterest is actually a really, really good tool. I think, to be honest with you, Pinterest is going to outdo all of the other sites in terms of the things that it can do, and it does it all visually. It's like an album. You can open the album, you start law school, and you start with contracts, torts, property, whatever. You can have a page, an album page, or a folder for just everything related to property, everything related to contracts, everything related to legal research. Okay, the blue book, how to blue book, my school actually has a blue book cheat sheet. You can take a picture of that cheat sheet, post it on Pinterest, and you just kind of have to go to it, and you can get that very easily using your mobile devices. When you're working on the paper, etc., you need to see how to cite to something. That was in your Pinterest account, and you can get to it very easily.
You can keep that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm not sure about that. But I'm not saying for you to have it as a class. You can create your own for the class and have them go to that specific page, which would be yours. Okay, but they're possibly going.
Share stuff with everybody in the United States.
Right. Well, of course, you're not going to share stuff that's, your intellectual property, so to speak. You're going to be wise about the way that you do that. You're just going
So it's just
to share
an easy way
portions.
for them to get stuff that's
Exactly.
you're just kind of
Right.
collating it for them.
Right. So the things that you probably don't want other people to, the entire world to see, you're not gonna do that with, of course. Instagram, it's kind of similar to Pinterest, but it's not as robust, I think. But it's very attractive because it's again another visualization tool, and so is YouTube. In terms of, and that's actually one that's in my research showed that it was really very heavily used by teachers in grade schools, high schools, and colleges. And I know for a fact that it's used in some law school classes at times. In conclusion, I think there are certain things that we have to pay attention to. One of the major ones is, what are the ABA requirements in terms of actual in-class teaching hours versus the online methodology that you may be using? I think that's important to consider as you're determining whether you're going to, how are you going to use Facebook, the Facebook group page, how many hours, etc. You need to consider those things and I guess keep it in relation to what the ABA requirements are in terms of the amount of hours that's required for in-class teaching versus online mode. As I mentioned earlier, a school/class social media policy is really, really important, because if your school doesn't have a policy, then you want to probably, before you start the class, ensure that you have that policy printed, it's clear, the students understand it before you go forward, because you don't want issues later on in terms of privacy issues coming up when, they may have posted a picture of themselves doing XYZ and it went into the group page by accident, or whatever the case is, to kind of ensure that you're on top of that setting out what the rules and policies is going to be for the class going forward. It may also be important for you to add someone else in the class to assist you with monitoring the social media feeds, I guess, or if you have a teaching assistant, because you may not always be, I guess, wired to see what's being posted on the Facebook group page. I think someone mentioned earlier there are resistance and privacy concerns. I think this is something that's going to come up, and it comes up in every area, or in everything practically everything that you do at certain points. Just generally speaking, there is going to be resistance. There's going to be resistance from your administration, and I think we as researchers, educators, lawyers, professors, I think we know how to make the arguments. And of course, the best way I think to do it is just using the benchmarks, using research, and making the proposal convincing that, yeah, it's something that we do need to look at, because look at the student rate in terms of the bar passage rate. I mean, how can we improve that? What are some of the things that we can do to improve the students' ability to retain information and really do well on the bar? And that would improve the whole performance of the law school in general in terms of their rankings. Sure.
With the professor on Facebook. Because obviously I
Definitely, and my reading also reflected that you can actually use a Skype feed to introduce guest lecturers into your classroom. Having a Skype feed with a Hague Tribunal judge or something like that for an international law class would be really good, to ask that judge about their whatever decision they may have made, how they, whatever way you want to frame it. What I'm trying to say is that you can make the classes more interactive and have this millennial generation kind of not see the need to have to multitask in the class, because it's doing exactly what they do and what they're accustomed to. And of course, paying attention always and at all times at the ethical considerations when you're doing all of this.
A lot of the software that's out there, it's set up for the class ends, maybe it stays around. Like what's going on with this one?
You can do both.
Yeah.
You can do both.
How do you do it? Do you do it?
Like I said, I just started at PACE, and this is something that's innovative that I'm I am kind of proposing that it's a better way to ensure students.
I mean, which would you do? Do you think you set up one just for a while and then close the group after the class was over, or would you
I think
longer term so that alumni?
I think I would probably close it, and the reason I would is because I don't want the current class members to kind of get the answers ahead of time, because that original group page would have had the whole discussion on the same topic that I would present the following semester or year. So I probably would close it, or maybe just hide it, or I think there's a way that you can keep the history of it,
You
because.
could have certain posts, just make more visible.
Right, something like that, but just not make it available to them so they can see it. Okay, go ahead.
As someone who is and all of this, but now they have a school related where I will be judged here's by my faculty. Now they're going to use even Facebook. Is there any that almost adds an extra layer? So that professional distance that well, some of you are my Facebook friends, some of you know you, right? So like how did that work with this initial?
Okay, I'm responding to a question asked about whether there's stress to students in terms of using Facebook in a professional manner versus their private and social use of any social media tool, so to speak. Well, first of all, I'm going to reiterate, I've never had a class where I've never practically done this myself. I'm proposing that it can be done, and I've done some research on it. What my research revealed, though, is I did not see any kind of stress or any reports about stress. What I found is that the students were very receptive, and they actually preferred that method, at least in the college arena, and there were some articles on the use of social media in law school classrooms, and the students were extremely receptive, and they found that they were able to develop more of a rapport with their faculty member than they would have otherwise had if it was just a regular lecture class, Socratic method, and they learned more, and they were really, really excited about it, from what I've read.
If you're not friends with people, so there's a lot of.
But it's another link on my Facebook that I better not.
But as a parent of high school, so
I think it comes down to like a 90-10 rule. Privacy concerns, or they just don't want to have to not accept friend requests. I did is I joined the group. Next thing I did is I sent a friend request to you because I'm a friend. I feel bad because I know we didn't accept it. So, I mean, those, but just, I don't feel bad. Yeah, but those types of things with students, might cause a little bit of emotional. That was introduced. I don't know, I mean, it could be a 90-10 thing, you sort of have to.
And like I said, this is something that's fairly new, especially in a law school setting. There are some law schools that are actually doing it. As you see, my resources are printed. There's a link to a Google list of resources, and I think her name is Nicole Black, that wrote 3 specific articles that focuses on law faculty members who actually use social media in teaching in some format.
She's in New York.
Nicole Black?
Yeah.
I think so. I think so, yeah. But there were 3 really good articles that she wrote
My take
focusing
is
on
that
this issue.
That students will see your classes because they're on Facebook. Although the tools are made for education, very good for events, things like that. I think there's a lot of privacy.
Actually, my readings did mention that you could set up a professional page that's solely your professional, page, using a different, I guess, email address, et cetera, and then have your private page. A lot of my reading did mention that people did. Exactly, and that's my issue. That's my issue. You have so many accounts to kind of log in and log out of. Right. Right. I think the key here is just to be professional at all times and just be careful about what it is that you're doing on Facebook, period. And I think having students in law classes be familiar with this from the inception, it kind of gets them wary of it going through their life as professionals. And that's the end of my spiel. If there are no other further questions, thank you very much. You had great questions. Thank you very much. This is the first time I'm seeing you since I came here.
Yeah, a bunch of us who are so can't, and obviously there's people who just take sale downstairs.
Those two students are gonna be seven
Class, and we don't take anybody out. Law school.
It went to princess to learn how to do their settings anyways. I mean, it's really, and I check every social media account before. I won't necessarily mistake.
Question for the more school? Seems to be a lot of people. I joined the group. Yeah, I posted on Slack the, great, thank you. How about a basic Slack?
Right, yeah, I tried to get us in Slack, no one else. We did tag.
Well, they have videos.
Some other things, like, you know, this, I don't have Facebook all day. And one of the ways that, like, my, I feel like it takes away from my child. All time, because there should be an issue. We still have Facebook.
I don't know. Yeah, I went with December, I went through it once. And the only reason I didn't, I have two separate accounts. Exact same thing. You can't, and so that's why I was like, right, so I keep my two. My friend's military, I go right on an isolated.
That's a great solution.
I just want to switch it. Is that something to talk about? Right, restrictions. The military actually 5 years ago put out an email this. Probably getting kicked off by the group. So I think it's something curious about. It may not be military situation, maybe it's different.
And just like my,
Well, I had mine before this all happened, right, so I used to watch it slowly move it to work. So I had all their, which I decided that it was like.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, it was 75,000.
75,000.
Oh, most of them took my breaks. So I got down to 900 lines.
That's most of it's a great thing, but I try to. Have to change getting a lot of, this is what we're fighting, we'll have to go with it, or we go.
All time and
And the other thing with the groups is you can choose.
Yeah, it was stuff like that, but more like, awesome music. And so, like, as soon as I set it up, she started doing that, so I locked it down.
And another one of my friends.
If they're comfortable with it, you can just do it. And everybody, you know, just sign up, I mean, maybe you can have this on Facebook on a different day. So there's ways around it. Yeah, or work with the instructor. Maybe, I do think I would prefer a student.
And she won't follow
My schedule.
One more minute.
Yeah.